The Japanese have a special word. It's kaizen. Kaizen means continual, slow improvement. A little bit of change here. Every time you see something that could be improved, just change it. Improve it a little bit. And over time, this makes a huge difference to one's business, one's procedure, the way one teaches, whatever it may be. The University of Leicester. Now the slide was supposed to change there.
Sorry, you need just once you click it once, it should be okay.
At the University of Leicester, the genetics department is very well considered throughout the world as a teaching school. And one of the reasons why they've achieved this status is because they, knowingly or not, use this approach of kaizen, of trying to improve the teaching in any which way that comes along. And they've been doing this successfully for a long time, but there's a limit sometimes to where you can go with it. Sometimes you come up with barriers. What can you do? In genetics, one of the main things that one needs to do is laboratory time. The practical aspect of genetics is very important, especially for doctors, people who are doing biological sciences. They want to become a doctor. They need to understand the genetics aspect, and they need to be able to go into the laboratory and do some of the procedures. But genetics laboratories are very expensive. They're something like £2 million to build another one. So how do you get around giving them a bit more laboratory time? You want to improve the way you teach. You think a little bit more laboratory time here and there for this purpose, for that experiment, would be really helpful. How do you do it when you can't build just another laboratory and also can't staff it? Because these laboratories typically, they might have 100, 150 students, they'll have the teacher, they'll have screens all around the laboratory, you can see, because it's too big for everybody to see the actual tutor. And there'll be laboratory assistants walking around helping the students, making sure they don't get into trouble, making sure they don't spill anything on themselves or on the floor, which is some dangerous chemical. It's a big task. So this was the beginning of the Swift project. It was an attempt to improve the teaching of genetics another little step by giving some extra tuition in a laboratory without spending £2 or more million in doing it. And the way that we did it was to create a virtual laboratory. At the time, we used Second Life because in 2009 or 8, when the project was conceived, Second Life was really the only one in town. That's changed, I'm pleased to say. We now have many incarnations of the Open Simulator. We have Unity 3D. We have a number of other potential ways in which to create this. But we use Second Life to create our virtual laboratory. And again, back in 2009, we didn't really know if this was going to work at all. We thought maybe we'd get some students in and they'd just mess around, kind of look at it and go, well, it's a bit silly. Maybe they wouldn't like it. Maybe they refuse to do it. Who knows? Our first task was, we considered this a difficult piece of software to use, and we thought maybe we'd have to train them, perhaps for quite a long time before they could even use this new technology. So over the period of Swift, we improved the way in which we train the students again. We started out by getting them in for a couple of hours, half a dozen of their laptops, and carefully giving them one-to-one tuition. This is how you create your avatar, this is how you, etc., etc. We soon realised that actually they got it, just like that really. But we didn't need to train them that much. So we created this maze, and we got it to the point where essentially we just give the students the URL, we ask them to create their avatar in advance, and off they go. They follow these yellow lines around. It gives them tasks. This one is to test out the chat. They talk to a parrot. If you're in the tree, it talks back. This one here is to practice clicking on things. You click on the boxes, they change colour. It asks you what colour you want, etc. And we got it down to less than 30 minutes. We put them in there. Come back 30 minutes later, they've all got it quite sufficiently in order to be able to carry on. One of the ways we did it was to realise that we don't have to train them in everything. We only need to train them in the things they're actually going to use for the lesson, which actually is very much. It's maybe walking around, using the camera, sitting on things and clicking on things, and perhaps changing into a lab code. Over a period of time, we modified and improved, and the students seem to have improved. It seems that this concept has now become more mainstream in the world, and students just seem to get it even faster. So we're still using the lab, and it's maybe 15 minutes now, or 20. So we were quite pleased with the way that went. Confident that students would actually want to use it, we created our first laboratory. It's quite straightforward. It doesn't do very much. It's just got some rows of benches and objects from the real laboratory. And this is for new students who, straight from school, some of them have never been in the laboratory before. And it's actually a bit of a problem in the real laboratories because you have to spend time telling them, don't run, tie your hair back, don't wear sandals, long list of things. So we tried creating this simple lab and having the tutor walk around with the students following and giving descriptions. This is the Bunsen burner, this is the ethanol, don't open the ethanol bottle, put it next to the Bunsen burner because it will explode and that's really not good. So I've got a little clip.
By clicking on the pencil dishes, I'm sure to change what you see on the screen. These microscopes can also be changed in focus by clicking on the right hand button. So you can move your objects in and out of focus.
That was just a little over-the-shoulder view of one of our students in the early days, following the tutor around the laboratory. So, the students sat in the room, computer room, and at the same time they're walking around the virtual laboratory. And we found an interesting thing at this point. The students were talking to each other in the real laboratory about the work they were doing, and they were talking to each other by text in the virtual laboratory about the work they were doing. And when you look at what they're saying, they're very seamlessly and sensibly, if not cleverly, using the two channels for subtly different things. And also using the avatar and real names for subtly different things. So they will refer to somebody by their avatar name in either the real or virtual laboratory, or their real name in either laboratory, in a way that makes sense. And we were very impressed about this because we took this as meaning that they were understanding what was going on. They weren't just kind of a bit lost. So spurred on by this, we built our second laboratory. This was a lot more major. It had individual benches. The students sit at the bench, stand at the bench, and using a head-up display system which guides them through the task, they performed a genetic screening test, or at least they followed the procedure of performing it. And I'll describe the utility of that in a moment, but I just want to show you another video. You know that medical conditions like cystic fibrosis and sickle cell anemia are inherited, and you know how they can be detected in people's genes, their DNA. When you graduate, you'll be a doctor. You'll order genetic tests for your patients, and they'll be done for you. Right now, you don't have hours to spare learning how these tests are done, so you just get this demonstration. We wanted to change that. The Swift project at the University of Leicester created a virtual genetics lab where students can experience the process of genetic testing. In this virtual world, they don't need to learn exactly how to do the tests, just to understand how the different procedures fit together and how they connect with the theory. This display guides them, like a personal tutor. Each step represents actions they've seen in real labs. For example, they click on the samples to place them in the machine. They click on the machine to start the process. But here, we go beyond what the real labs can do. As the virtual machine runs, students see a 3D animation showing what happens to the molecules inside the machine. This is theory they've already studied, represented in context. As they move through the procedure, they experience a sequence of events for genetic testing. The PCR machine that multiplies the patient's DNA. The water bath, where reactions take place to cut the DNA. The gel that separates DNA fragments by size. Again, an animation is shown to demonstrate the actual process. Student feedback is clear. The overwhelming majority find this experience helpful, both for new learning and for revision. The Swift Lab remains as an openly available resource for future students, a successful example of teaching with virtual worlds. Okay, so that was a synopsis of our second and main experiment or virtual laboratory that we used. And as you can see, there are a number of features which I'm going to mention as I go through. But in particular, note that animation that came up, because we found that one of the most useful things. It's very hard for students to connect theory with practice. They study theory in the classroom, they do their practice in the lab, they can get good results on both sets of questions, but if you actually get them to connect the two up and say, why are you putting those few drops of liquid in that right now, which bit of theory does it relate to? They find that difficult. So anything that will connect up the theory and the practice is likely to be very helpful. We had a special time on the 3-year project to try something a little more esoteric, I suppose. We wanted to push the boundaries a little bit of what the virtual space could do. So we took an existing task, which was a problem-based learning task based on cards. You have a stack of cards and a group of students, and each card asks you a question: what should you do next to create a medically important protein? And according to what answer you think is correct, you go to a different card. We wanted to replicate that and improve on it. So we created this. And each of these nodes here is equivalent to one card. The signposts are the directions to the next card. The question on the card is on the notice board there. And they follow it around this kind of game-like environment, I would say. And I'll talk a bit about games in a short while. We're very happy that the lab is still there, it's still working. It's a slightly modified version for iScience. We have an automated feature that we created which switches between the regular lab and the iScience version. And we set it up for the iScience students each year, and they really like it as part of their lab, as part of their course. And one of the reasons why they like it, if I can persuade this to do as it's told. One of the reasons why they like it is because integrated science, it's an undergraduate degree, it's an unusual one based upon problem-based learning, and it involves physics, chemistry, biology. It's the main sciences all together in an integrated way, and as a result they don't get very much lab time at all. So giving them extra laboratory time in the virtual lab is really helpful to them. This is the same group. A few days later I went into the real lab and took some photos of them using the actual equipment. This is the same equipment that they were using in the virtual lab, and it's a part of the same thing that they did. So they will have a guideline in their mind of what they might want to do in the real laboratory, having done the main procedure in the virtual laboratory. Just a brief thing of how we got our results from Swift. Generally speaking, they did a little bit better with Swift. You have to remember a lot of these are very motivated students. A lot of them are going to become doctors. They're really going for it. They want to get that doctorate degree, and they want to make sure they're doing well. So in a sense, whatever you do, they're going to do really well. And it's quite hard to get them to do a little bit better. But we think we did help. One of the main things is that almost without exception, all the students who used the virtual lab felt it was helpful and they really liked it. It was a positive experience for them, and they pointed out a lot of little reasons why they felt it was helpful. One of them, I've not put that quote here, one of them referred to something she called prelearning. She liked the idea of going into the virtual lab and doing this kind of pre-learning of the procedures. So when you get to the real lab, it's not so confusing, it's more sensible. There's like a background blueprint, as it were. So, to try and apply what we've learned from the Swift project. 7 reasons for teaching in virtual worlds. There are also 7 ways of teaching in virtual worlds, but there are also reasons. Number 1, simulation. If you have something that you want students to learn about, and it involves some space, some physical location, object, circumstance, it's very hard to get that experience by book or even a video. Creating a simulation of somewhere and getting students to go around it and do some activity in it, it really makes a big difference to the overall understanding of that circumstance. So we used it for a laboratory, but one could use it for anything. I think one of the things about using virtual worlds is you have to start with a good helping of imagination and then boil it down to reality. But it can be quite challenging, I think, for a teacher who's used to the constraints of the classroom to suddenly have all these opportunities open. It's quite difficult to kind of imagine what it could do. If you want to talk about the pyramids, well, take them to a virtual version of it. They can get a feel of walking around. They can see that when you go around here, you can't see the Sphinx now because it's all these little details and concepts. The simulation does not have to be high fidelity, really detailed. It's surprising how much you can get out of just a few shapes and some photos. It's efficient. One of the big things about virtual spaces is that although it may not seem that real at the time, or in fact it may, what happens is, in the person's memory, when they look back, it's hard to immediately distinguish real and virtual. The fact is, you had the experience, and that's really what counts. Role play. There are several features of virtual worlds which make it very useful for role play. One of them is context. It relates to simulation. If you want to hold language classes somewhere because you want the context, well, you can hold them in a station in Germany or a cafe in Paris or anywhere that you like. And that role play will take place within a context. The context can be very useful. In our case, our group also created an oil rig. Simon Keir created this and set it all up. And it was for occupational psychology, I think it was MSc, and we asked the occupational psychology people took some students around the oil rig to get a feel for what it was like to inspect an oil rig and to have that experience. And what we did was, we didn't tell them, but we created an emergency. We set virtual fire to some barrels of oil, and we set off the alarm saying there's a fire, please leave the rig straight away. And it was very interesting what happened. The same sort of panic and confusion that you get in a real place when you haven't organised a proper drill. People were going the wrong direction, bumping into each other, not because they didn't know how to use the system, but because they were all not really sure what they should do. They were falling into the sea because they weren't looking where they were going. It was very interesting and instructive. And so they were playing that role, and it gave them the experience. Another thing about role play is it can be as anonymous as you like, and that can really help. There has been the use of virtual worlds for role play, for people who had maybe child abuse in their life, and they're trying to recover now as adults, or teenagers in fact, it was, and getting them to talk to each other, but in the virtual space, and in a pleasant virtual space, maybe a virtual cafe. And that was found to be really helpful. So role play is a very useful thing in virtual spaces. You don't have that everyone staring at you. It's not just education. Corporations, Microsoft, HP, IBM have all used virtual worlds for training, and the US Army have recently, last year, been experimenting with setting up a large simulation of an Afghan village, and they invited members of the public in to play the role of either locals or army personnel, and they tried out a search and check out procedure. It was quite interesting. Things along the line of, excuse me sir, would you please accompany me to your vehicle? If these gentlemen would like to help you. But it was remarkably real. Personal tutor. You're in this space, everything that happens through the computer. There's a lot of opportunities there to monitor exactly what the learners are doing, and to give them extra feedback, extra help, extra assistance automatically. So the computer can be, to what extent it can manage it, a personal tutor. And we use that in the laboratory to use this animation that came up. In the real laboratory, they put something in this water bath, press start, and go and have a coffee for 2 hours, or work on something else. It doesn't have the same meaning. In the virtual space, they're in the mindset of putting something in the water bath, and an animation comes up showing them what the DNA molecules are actually doing. And students found that very helpful because it's in context, it occurs at the moment they need to see it. There are these things called bots, or non-playing characters, in the game term NPCs, and this is a relatively new technology whereby you have an avatar in the virtual world that's actually controlled entirely by the computer, and it can listen to what the person it's interacting with says, text, chat, listen, and respond in a helpful manner. And I'm just wondering if I have time to go to the video on this. I don't think I do. But our technology supplier, Dave, who helped us with this, have been working on these bots, and there's a limit to what bots can do, because the thing about personal tutor is it can only, in a sense, it's an automated frequently asked questions, in my view, because it can't quite understand. A really good teacher, when a student asks a question, they can analyse that question and work out what the student probably doesn't know and tell them that, as well as answering the question. It may well be they don't really need to know the answer to the question they've asked. A bot can answer the question and there may be not that much needed. So it's going to be a very, very long time before the good teachers are replaced. But they can certainly be assisted in a very big way. I like this one. Reason for experience. There's quite an emotional connection with the virtual space. And this is the which one was it now?
Is that virtual hallucination?
Yes, it is. Yes. I haven't been there for quite a long time. I'd recommend going if you're interested. It's really quite quite an experience.
It freaks you out. It really does freak you out.
Yes, thank you. It freaks you out.
Yeah.
As you're walking around, things are changing in a way that is designed to perturb. Words will be picked out, or letters will be picked out from words on the wall to make words which are negative. There's a voice all the time in your head telling you how worthless you are and what negative things you should do with yourself. It's really a strong experience, and I don't show a video of it for that reason. But it shows how you can use virtual space to give someone an experience of something in the world. I leave it to your imagination to think how that can be applied. You can create things. As I said earlier, it's limited only by imagination, and you can take something that's quite abstract and maybe difficult to explain, and create some physical representation of it, however odd, bizarre, usually expensive to create, large, small, whatever. This is Bloom's taxonomy in a 3D space. There's something about walking around it whilst discussing it that is different to just looking at it on a piece of paper. And as I mentioned earlier, our third experiment, we took this fairly abstract problem-based learning kind of task, and we converted it into a 3D space for people to walk around and experience. We also added, at crucial moments, you can teleport down to the virtual laboratory and do a little experiment that will support the learning of the task that you're in. So we added a lot of value to it, in addition to changing it to a tangible situation. And number 6, art. I've been quite impressed by some of the art that people have created. Paintings, sculptures. In the virtual world, of course, the laws of physics are negotiable. That's kind of interesting if you're an artist, because you can do, again, it's down to imagination. You can do things which one wouldn't expect. And I've seen some really interesting things. In fact, it's quite a big thing within Second Life. Philip Rosedale, who created it, was a big fan of Burning Man, which is held in Nevada each summer. I looked on the website. It said, if you're thinking of coming to Nevada, remember that the desert is trying its best to kill you. That was the opening sentence of the advice. It's much safer in virtual space. But the point of the festival is that you create a festival out of nowhere in the middle of the desert, where there's just nothing but mud, dry mud, and it's all art installations and similar. So each year they used to call it Burning Man, now it's this. In fact, it starts in a couple of weeks in Second Life, and if you're interested in the use of virtual spaces for art, that's probably a good place to go. So, here we go. The 7 reasons, some guidelines. Treat it as real, because that's how it will be remembered. Experiential, constructivist approaches are much better. I've seen people have a PowerPoint lecture in a virtual space. Think carefully before doing that, because there may be better ways of doing it. And avoid gimmicks, just design what you actually need. And a few things to perhaps not do. It does look like a game to many people at first glance. And one of the things that I found with people new to virtual spaces is they go, well, so it's a game and our students are going to be playing it, and so we should do something a bit game-like. But that's like that's pushing the design phase in a direction that's completely unnecessary. Games essentially are virtual worlds with a game running in them. So virtual worlds are virtual worlds without the game. I like this bit. A lot of people then go through what I call the gee whiz phase. It goes something like this. Wow, look, I can fly. Oh, I can do this. Oh, there's no gravity. Oh, we can create all wow. Really, they do. I did as well, once upon a time. Then if you try and design in this phase, you get design teaching spaces in this phase. You tend to get things like, oh wow, we could put all the chairs up on fluffy white clouds, and we can have a big sailing ship and project a PowerPoint onto the sail, and wouldn't that be brilliant? The students will love it. Once you get over the gee whiz phase, that's the time to start designing. And then another thing that I've noticed tends to happen a lot. It's understandable. People do what they're used to. We have a virtual space, it can do anything in it, so let's do what I'm used to. Fine, but you can do that anywhere. The critical thing with virtual spaces is to treat them as real, do what you normally do, but add in the extra things that you need in order to do something that's pedagogically really useful, but nothing else. Okay, I've just got a few minutes to talk about my view of the future. In a sense, virtual spaces are still, they've just come out of the future. They've just become a present. How would you describe, where do you start looking in the future? The near future is fine, but the far future? The near future is we use them more, for more things, and show how successful they can be. Going beyond that, well, I think science fiction writers probably have the best standpoint for the far future. If you look at the past, a lot of Arthur C. Clarke's writings have become reality. The novel Snow Crash preceded virtual worlds. They weren't designed particularly on it, but it describes many of the features of them. The Star Trek communicator. I was really impressed when I got my Motorola phone. Yeah. Yeah, you get the idea. 2005. Of course, now it's almost obsolete because we don't really use phones anymore very much. It's all been the past. So, you know, it was a future which once upon a time was amazing future, and it was real, and now it's like that. So, where are we going with virtual spaces, virtual worlds? What's in the distant future? Okay, I'm going to show you a little bit of my last video.
That's the bad guy. His name's Eli Holly. They call him the Butcher of Bozeman. He's killed 23 men. He's the meanest and toughest gunslinger in the West. You have to watch him. He's fast.
So I'm here to apprehend him.
If you can.
You are under arrest. You will come with me.
No. Computer, freeze program.
What is wrong?
That was too easy. It has to be harder to beat the bad guys. Otherwise, it's no fun. Computer, increase program difficulty to level 4. Go back to where my father and I first walked into the saloon. Come on, Father.
So that's one vision of what one could do if one had unlimited technology in order to use a virtual space. As you probably gather, everything there was virtual, except the two main characters. It's using technology we don't have, it's using technology we probably never will have, but it's doing a function which would be really useful because you have complete immersion, you have the sense of being there. And the way that I would see the far future is we will go towards that goal. However unlikely it may seem to reach it, I think going in that direction will take us a long way. So, alas, I haven't got time quite to explain this, but I see that we're going from the desktop into more and more mobility, basically, in terms of virtual spaces. We'll be less constrained by just having to sit there in a space. It will become more immersive. It will become mixed up with real reality. Did I just say real reality? Yes. So, if we just look at the top line, That's today, virtual worlds. That's almost today. This is Second Life running on a Nexus 7 with the Lumia app, and it works well enough to use, but not well enough to teach with yet. But mobile is definitely going to come with virtual spaces. Moving further forward, this is an interesting way of going. There's a number of different glasses that are coming out which allow the impression of virtual spaces, or the impression of partial virtual spaces. So here we've got somebody, the engine is real, the chap is real, everything's real except for the tab at the top, the label, and the green, the fact that the glasses have overlaid a real pipe, whatever it is, with green in order to make the point. And that is being tracked and followed so that as he learns about the engine, so it shows different things. It's doing what we're doing in the lab, in the virtual space, but he's in a real space with a real engine. These are some different glasses. The Oculus Rift. First name is the company name, the second one is the name of the object at the top. Very clunky. Works-ish. Next one down, another Kickstarter. If this is the glyph, I only forget the name of the company. That's coming out. That's just been funded in Kickstarter, and it uses a different technology. It projects directly onto the retina. There's no screen. That has potential for getting very, very small and cute. And the one at the bottom is made by Epson, and they call it the Movero, which is gives you an idea of where they think they're going. They thought perhaps people would want to watch 3D movies. This is the version 1 of it. Could be called the version 2. I'll demonstrate. Definitely clunky. But it gives you a see-through thing, so I can see the world, but it can also project something into the world in 3D in addition. That's kind of the current state of the art. The one at the bottom comes out in May, that's the version 2. And that would allow this concept. So you have the mixing of the virtual and the real in whatever way is pedagogically useful. And again, it comes back to imagination, to actually being able to think of how to use these technologies and to follow previous ways of using them in order to use them in an effective way. Let's see. So, yes. This is a suggestion of the 4 different styles, but really it's just names. It's just, you have the real, you have the virtual, and it's how much you mix them up. This is what I want to see. I want to see our students in the real laboratory with that animation just there. So they're using a real lab, but they still see the animations at the right moment, and they still see the other information that we want to give them as they go along as a personal tutor. And it's not going to go away. If you look at the history of media, newspapers, radio, television, internet, they're all still here. It doesn't matter that we're talking about new and exotic looking technologies. It doesn't mean that virtual worlds as we know them are going to disappear. They'll have their place. They'll have their big place in the world and in the world of teaching. And it will carry on going. So reason 7. The virtual worlds are now available, and they've really got a great future. So, some people, special thanks to, and thank you to you for listening.
Please, just missed number 7, please. Can you just go back?
So, Any thoughts, suggestions, questions?
There were quite a few questions that came through the chat I noticed as you were going through, so maybe...
Yeah, there were a couple of questions. One was about who did the programming in the for your initial project. Was it your team, or did you buy people in? That was the question that came through.
It's interesting. This is a question with one of two questions that I do usually get asked. The second one is, how much did it cost? So, here we go. For the first lab, Jim Exin helped us to do the scripting. I built the objects. So I went into the genetics laboratory, I took photos of them, straight on photos, and then cut out that and pasted it onto an object in the virtual space so it looked like the real object. And I don't know, maybe it took me maybe about 3 weeks or something to create the main lab with all the objects. Then the actual functionality of it doing things is when you click, something happens. In the first lab, that was by Jim Exon, and the second lab, it was daily limited, and they used their pivot system to provide a head-up display, which is what guides the student through. And then Suzanne Lavelle, the teaching fellow on the project, she set up the actual content of the pivot system. So in terms of what it actually told the students and asked them, she set that up. I should stand here really, because the people from Adobe Connect can't see me.
The other question was about, was the voice used in the simulation on the oil rig? Did you use voice, or was it just texting? Was it voice and texting when you set up the simulation and ran it with the occupational health? Were they using voice as well as?
They were using voice. Yes. Voice. To use voice or not has been quite a question, in fact, over the years. It was a lot of people didn't like it when voice was introduced, in fact. Voice makes it more immediate. Text has benefits. One of the benefits of the virtual world is that people who are less able to jump up and go, excuse me, miss, excuse me, they have more of an opportunity to participate. With text, everybody can write their questions. What often works well is to have, if it's a teacher in a class type situation, the teacher uses voice to speak and the class asks questions by text. And that way, it doesn't get so complicated.
I have a question. I think it's amazing all these things that you've done, and I'm very impressed. I noticed that in phase 2, you were talking about this communication going on, both in virtual world and in the classroom. But when you moved on to phase 3, it became individual, personal-based learning. And I can't help wondering, why use virtual worlds for what is almost just a simulation which could be done in multimedia and put on a CD-ROM. So I'm wondering how you justify having it in virtual worlds.
There is something about being an avatar and putting on a lab coat and going into the lab with your friends and then standing at a bench with your friends around you and performing the procedures of an experiment. There's a different feeling. It's qualitatively different to using multimedia. And it's that experience which students seem to find makes it more meaningful to them. Perhaps it's motivation, perhaps it's more real to them, and therefore they seem to find it more beneficial to them.
But because they were doing it individually, going in individually, you said, so...
They were, most of the times we used it, they were still in the computer lab, able to chat to their friends, and they were all avatars together to keep in the kind of little house building, and then they walked into the lab and as in a real lab, generally, people don't work that much in groups in real labs. You tend to be doing your own thing because you've got physical, chemical things moving around, etc. So that's a technical thing. But still, there's the feeling of doing this with your friends, with your group. So yes, you have an individual bench, but it wasn't a standalone system, it was a multi-user system, there were a lot of people there. So it was a different experience.
Well, can I jump in there with another to that answer? Is that okay? One of the things about, as the difference that Paul's alluding to there is about embodiment. So because you have a body within that, the avatar makes a difference, you have a body within that. And a lot of the learning that goes on within the physical world is an embodied cognition. It's because we go into physicality as we're interacting, so it becomes more embedded in the way that we interact. And because in virtual worlds, you have a body in that virtual world rather than just something on the screen, then actually that draws on that sense of embodied cognition. And so that's why the learning is more real, is because you have a sense of your body within that space.
No, because I think one of the biggest affordances of the virtual world is the actual interaction, the social interaction that you get between avatars.
It's an affordance, but the connection you have with your avatar is another one. And if you're not doing that in the physical world interacting, then it's not going to get you a simulation too.
I think if you look at those six ways in which to use virtual space, each one is using a different feature of that space. And so I suppose that's one of the things I'm trying to say, is that although, yes, like with role play, the fact that you're in a social group interacting within a context is critical, that's the whole point. But that's a feature of that way of using it. But there are other ways of using it, which don't necessarily require you to have other people around. It still has, there are a lot of performances available in virtual space. Art, for example. You could imagine somebody wanting to create a 3D sculpture that hovered in the air and gravity was the wrong direction. You know, an artist can spend hours, days, weeks just engrossed in creating that art. They don't want other people around, but they do want this concept of being somewhere because they know other people are going to walk around their creation. So there are different affordances and different things. And yes, what you say is very important affordance for some of its uses, but there are others.
Yes, I just wanted to say that for those of you, I've noticed that some others questions, but if you can jot them down, and then there will be a panel in the end, and that might be a good place also to discuss things, yeah?